Natasha Clark, great that you could have a few moments to chat with us about what it is you're up to and how young people are are feeling about this time and how they're seeing the church. Perhaps, Natasha, you should start off by saying just something about what it is that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's lovely to talk to you again. So I work in youth ministry. I work for the Diocese of Ely down in Cambridgeshire, and I'm now had a couple of roles with them. And at the moment, what I do is I oversee youth ministry across Cambridgeshire and West Norfolk. But I've got a particular focus on trying to work with churches collectively and ecumenically to reach places we haven't reached before, and to work with young people who have up until now had no engagement with the church. So that does, what that looks like is working with communities around schools, around young people with particular vulnerabilities or particular issues that we can respond to, and trying to help churches think creatively that reaching young people might be or could be something different from what we've done in the past.
Great, that's really interesting. Thinking about working together with helping churches in this sector, could you give me an example of that kind of work where churches are coming together to do something for young people?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that has been at the heart of most of my work, and it's something that I love doing because we get to see churches together achieving something that they couldn't achieve individually. So in one town we work in, there had been a heart for young people in the town for a while, but there were maybe a couple of churches that had your small 5 to 10 young people youth group of kids who were already attending the church, of a community of 3,000 kids who were enrolled in the 2 secondary schools. So when I started in that role, what we did is just met with all of the churches and church leaders. I spoke at the services and just asked the question, what would it look like for us to work together to reach young people, and would you like to be involved? And what came from that really, and this is something that still really encourages me, is that the resource and the skill was already there. What we needed to do was bring the ones and the twos from lots of different churches together, and then they realized that they were in a team, and that team had always been there, but they weren't all in one worshipping community. And so that then meant that they were able to serve in a way that was fitting with their gifts, and also come behind a vision that that up until then I think the churches loved the idea of, but no one felt they could do it by themselves, so no one had been able to push that forward.
And the work that you're doing then, it is to enable young people to be more themselves, to become Christians. What's the particular aim of a project like that?
So that particular project, it's a project called Thrive Youth Work, and our aim or our vision is to see the lives of young people transformed. We are a thoroughly Christian project, and everything we do is an expression of our Christian faith and is an expression of the mission that we feel God has given us. But that doesn't mean that every action of the project has the specific objective of young people becoming Christians in that project. So we kind of imagine it on a bit of a continuum. So one of our programs is a mentoring program in the secondary school that is thoroughly missional, because we believe that if we can help young people to value themselves, they can start to understand what it means to be valued by God. So by helping them with mental health way down at this end of the spectrum, our mentors, who are volunteers from the churches, are fulfilling that mission. But then we also identified that that by itself was not going to necessarily see young people come into the kingdom. And so we created additional programs under the same banner that had opportunities where young people could ask questions and explore faith if they wanted. So we run youth cafes, and then at the end of the youth cafe, we have an opt-in kind of very low-key exploring faith group. And the great thing about that is that it's entirely unconditional. So it's really important to us that what we were communicating to young people is, you are welcome no matter what. we know that you have curiosities, and so when you want to express that, come to this group and this is a place you can do it. And as a result of that kind of trajectory or that continuum, what we now have is a group of young people who are forming a new worshipping community with members of the local churches who have kind of gone through that pathway. But at every step along the way, they have led the direction and they've initiated the next step. They actually came to us and specifically said, can you start a group where we read the Bible together? And they thought Hercules was in the Bible, like they'd never been to church, but they knew there was something more they wanted, and so they asked for it.
Good enough story perhaps to be in there, maybe in future versions, who knows, you know, an interesting idea. You mentioned just young people and your work with them. In these strange times, Natasha, how are young people feeling? What are the questions that they're asking in this period of COVID-19 where we're locked down?
So I find that a really challenging question to answer, because myself and not even almost everyone, myself and everyone I've spoken to who's working in youth ministry has found that their contact with young people has pretty much disappeared. So because in our work, I work a lot with young people who we have like drop-in programs, so they're not particularly keen on registration forms and consent forms and that sort of thing. So we don't have contact details and permission to contact them online. And so what we're finding is that those who are really committed will stay in contact, but all of that network, it kind of disappears. So actually being able to accurately say, how are they feeling? I don't know that I can actually adequately represent them. That being said, from the contact that I have had, I suspect that a lot of young people are kind of battening down the hatches. They're going into a retreat mode. So I'm thinking particularly of young people who are now in the situation where they are 24/7 in an environment that is maybe a bit challenging. And they are just surviving, I think. A lot of them are just getting through. And I suspect that at the end of this, a lot of them will then start to process what they've seen. But I think a lot of them can't or don't have the vocabulary to say, this is how we're feeling while it's happening. And it's not just big stuff. We had a young person last week who was quite distressed because they'd just seen dad drinking too much quite consistently since lockdown. And that's not going to, you know, get a dramatic intervention. That's not going to, you know, rate on any scale. But for a 14-year-old to see that change in behavior, it's quite distressing. And that's not to put any extra kind of burden on parents, because I know that being at home altogether is challenging, and we're all doing the best we can. But there are new things that our young people are seeing and being exposed to that I don't think they're adequately or have been adequately equipped to process. That being said, I also know of a bunch of young people who are just bored and they're just gaming at home and they're doing all right.
Yes. Yeah, just we've been jolted into a new place, really, which is challenges and opportunities. And yourself, in terms of the youth ministry and youth sector, church's engagement with young people, how going forward are you going to do things differently? I mean, you know, probably you can't answer that question fully. Of course you can't at the moment, but what are you suspecting that you're going to do differently to what you've been doing up until now, Natasha?
Because of this situation?
Yeah.
We are going to have to change things because the nature of the physical elements of youth work is going to have to change. So we used to run drop-in youth cafes, and they are low-key communities where we're all together and we eat together and we cook together. And that serving of each other over food and that sharing together around food is actually really significant in youth ministry. And it's a real blow that is probably not going to be able to be a part of our work for a while. It's going to be a real challenge because I don't yet know of anyone who says online youth ministry works. There are certainly ways of making do, But I don't know a youth worker who would prefer to do online work than in-person youth work. And despite all the talk that we see about young people and screen addiction and their devices, they're very relational, and we have a lot to learn from them in that. And so that's that informal community building activity. It's going to be interesting to see how we change. So my suspicion is that we're going to have to do more outdoors work, smaller groups, and I don't know how we're going to start new work. I can see a way forward where we work with the young people we were connected with. I see a real challenge being able to reach out to new young people when you don't have a physical community that you can invite them into.
So much at this time, I'm nodding because so much at this time is building on relationships where there is an element of trust. And if to introduce yourself or to be a person, how can you display your integrity or your authenticity and who you are through a screen? I don't know, I don't come from that generation. I'm always a wee bit skeptical about these things, but it's where we're at, and it's a huge challenge for us all. You're sounding maybe less than hopeful for the future, Natasha?
I don't think that's not my intention. What you've done is you've caught me halfway through figuring this out. And so I'll have to come back to you at the end. The things I am hopeful for are the fact that young people are hugely resilient, and they're going to teach us a lot about how they recover from this. And the other thing that I'm really hopeful for is that in all the work I've done as a teacher, as a youth worker, as an advisor, young people will tell us what works, and they will tell us where they want to go. And so it might be that I don't have the answers for what youth ministry will look like after this, but I guarantee that when I turn up to a field with a football, they'll tell me what it's going to be.
That's a good answer.
So
yeah.
I am hopeful in that sense, but I do also think we need to prepare ourselves perhaps for the fact that there are going to be challenges that will have really long-lasting impacts.
And final question, young people in the church, are you hopeful about their place being recognized, them playing their gifts as part of the whole church? Are you hopeful about that going forward?
I'm very hopeful about that going forward, but I do feel slightly in two minds. So let me explain my two minds. I'm really hopeful because from the perspective of young people, there's a whole generation that's a blank slate. So we are finding that when young people hear the message of Jesus for the first time, there's no baggage, there's no preconceived ideas. Their answer is, how can I find out more about this? We started a new group, and a boy who'd never been before biked around to get 4 of his friends to bring them, and he didn't know why, but he knew he wanted them to be there. So these young people are encountering a really authentic faith in Jesus that is really exciting. So that gives me a lot of hope that we can have a lot of faith in the future Christians who are, rising up in age, so to speak. The challenge we have is whether the whether the historical structures will receive them and will be willing to change.
Yeah.
And whether our churches and our Christian communities are willing to really do what they say they want. A lot of churches say to me, we wish we had young people, but none of them, sorry, not none, a number of them would not be willing to change things to make young people feel welcome.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really helpful, Natasha. Thank you for all you're doing. It's brilliant to see churches working together, to be hopeful, to be learning, to be honest. You've displayed all that. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.